I had seen 3 movies in my life before I changed my major to filmmaking. And now I'm a freshman at the University of Washington watching the 4th movie of my life, and its title was The Godfather. And I see this movie, and I walked out of the theater numb at the power of storytelling. This TV producer calls and he says, "Bill, would you write for our TV show?" Well, I said, "Do you pay?" And he said, "Well, of course." I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." I discovered you don't have to be qualified, but there's so few people willing to say yes to God that guy has to use whoever he can get. So here I am.
In this episode of the Wayfaring Stranger podcast, I talked to author and filmmaker Bill Myers. Bill is known for helping co-create the cartoon live-action show McGee and Me, which helped pave the way for the Christian home video market. Bill is also an author and has written nearly 120 books. A couple which we discuss are The Incredible Worlds of Wally McDougall and the Rendezvous with God series. In this conversation, we discuss Bill's resolution he made to God to do whatever he told him to do. We discuss what led to this decision, how this ended up affecting the career path he chose for his life, as well as the countless times it has left him feeling way in over his head and required him to wrestle with God in prayer and ask him for help. May his story and example inspire you to do the same. If somebody asks you what you do for a living, what do you tell them?
I guess I'm a communicator. Whether it's film or book or teaching, it's my agenda is to one way or another try to bring glory to God, and however any way I can find, I'll go after.
And what ways have you found to go after so far?
Boy, everything from relationships to books to the films and to teaching. It's just like anytime there's an opening, I go for it. Try not to get caught.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be preached at, but even if it's just keeping my mouth shut and loving somebody, hoping that works. But yeah, that's my life agenda is to, boy, that sounds really religious, but yeah, I just want to bring glory to God however I can get it to him.
But even though you ended up pursuing television, film, stuff like that, you weren't a big film buff growing up.
I had seen 3 movies in my life before I changed my major to filmmaking. I'd seen Pollyanna, I'd seen The Parent Trap, the original, and I'd seen Pinocchio. And now I'm a freshman at the University of Washington watching the 4th movie of my life, and its title was The Godfather. Blood was spurting, and my friends were standing up and cheering when people were getting massacred. And I had made a promise to the Lord just a few months before that, because I was really bored with Christianity. Hey, I love you, but you're kind of boring. You get away with that when you're 18. And I made this promise always to say yes to him. And I see this movie, and I walked out of the theater numb at the power of storytelling. And I gave God a good piece of my mind, told him to wake up and smell the coffee. And you know what you should do, God, and thanks for asking. You need to raise up these movie guys and get them to, and every time I told him what he had to do, it kind of bounced back at me. And so we had quite a few arguments, but I kept getting this, "Didn't you promise always to say yes to me" thing. So I changed my major to filmmaking. There wasn't a film school in the country that would take me. I didn't even know how to watch a movie. The only one that would take me was in Rome, Italy. Newsflash, they don't speak English in Rome, Italy, at least in the school. But I was there for a year, and there's a whole lot of things that people don't know about me. And one of them is I've got a speech deal. I was pretty old as a kid before I ever spoke. I had to don't try this at home, kids, but I cheated my way through high school taking a foreign language to get into the university just because words are not my friend. So now I'm in Rome, Italy, studying a subject I know nothing about in a language I can't speak. And I was sort of the class loser, but I wasn't bored. And so I thought, all right. So I spent a year of that humiliation, moved back to Seattle, got married, moved down to Los Angeles to become a rich and famous film director. Discovered they already had plenty of those. They didn't need any more, and thanks for playing. And proceeded pretty much to starve. We didn't starve. We just became experts at macaroni and cheese and top ramen. And and I'm saying, God, I promise to say yes to you, and I'll you name it, I'll do it. Well, except of course, except write, because you know how I got C's and D's in my one writing class in college, and words and I are not great pals. So I was directing a play in Los Angeles for free because nobody would hire me. And this TV producer calls and he says, Bill, would you write for our TV show? And I thought, well, I said, do you pay? And he said, well, of course. I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Hung up the phone, broke into tears going, my God, what have I done? And I wrote the world's worst TV show. It was so bad I threw a shoe at the TV set. But I wasn't bored. I wrote another one. This time they had the good sense not to buy it. And then a third one, and they didn't buy it. And we're back to top ramen again. And I get a call from an uninformed publisher back east who says, basically, Mr. Myers, we hear that you're a famous Hollywood TV writer, Christian writer. Would you like to write a book for our company? I asked if they paid. They said yes. I hung up. I said yes. I hung up and broke into tears again, honest, and just going, why? I mean, TV show, anybody. And I wrote the world's worst book. And I wrote another one that wasn't quite so bad, and another. And that was about 120, 130 books ago now. And a whole ton of screenplays. And then I started doing some directing, a lot of documentary work and films. I don't know, the three people that are watching this may remember the 16 millimeter film days. And they were heavy-handed, but at least I learned the craft that way. So that's pretty much it. My whole life is one surprise after another because it's like I just keep saying yes, and he keeps raising the bar, and I keep swimming out of my depth, but he keeps saving me somehow. So that's kind of who I am. It's the same thing I'm teaching at a high school on the life of Jesus. It's a prep school, so all the teachers got their PhDs and their masters of whatever, and I got a Bachelor of Arts in theater, and I'm teaching on the life of Jesus. Again, I picked up the phone. Guy says, would you be interested? I said, yeah, sure. And I've been doing that for 10 years and just having a blast at it. So I discovered you don't have to be qualified. I mean, my qualifications are I'm a crybaby, a coward, and kind of a loser. But there's so few people willing to say yes to God that the poor guy has to use whoever he can get. So here I am.
So you're probably best known for creating McGee and Me, right? Co-creating McGee and Me.
Okay.
Would you say that?
There's another kids' book series called The Incredible Worlds of Wally McDougall that's done really, really well, too. Books have probably done better than McGee and Me. But again, somebody called up and asked me if I would write a vacation Bible school skit, and I did. And then they called up and said, well, maybe you could make a book out of this. And I did. And that was 28 books ago and about 2.3 million sales ago. So I work hard at the craft because it's for the Lord. I don't skate, but initially I get pulled into things way over my head,
Mm.
which I'm such an egotist. It's pretty important I be there because then I'm always crying out for help instead
Yeah.
of saying, "Okay, God, I got this covered. Go ahead and do something else."
Mm.
So, yeah, probably started with McGee and Me. I'd been writing and directing films, things like for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, those sort of little dramatic promotional films, and a lot of missionary films. But yeah, then that hit, and then suddenly people thought I was a writer, so I rode that train, and I'm still on it. This isn't going to be broadcasting.
Yeah, we can
Yeah, yeah.
edit that out.
So, knowing my great writing skills, I mentioned the C's and D's, right?
Yes.
Okay. Knowing my great writing skills, I've obviously, look at me.
Explain kind of the concept behind McGee and Me. Where did that come from?
Tyndale House and Focus on the Family spent about, I believe, 18 months doing research to find out what would minister best in a video series. And they had a problem. They said that the research showed that children 4 to 8 were interested in animation, and children 8 to 12 were more interested in live action. So what do we do? Well, how about both? So, the concept behind McGee and Me is a boy, an artist, and one of his art creations comes to life, at least in his imagination, and they have various adventures and so forth. It almost didn't happen for a couple reasons. Way back then, we weren't sure if Christians would think VHS videos were the work of the devil, so we had to deal with that. And then nobody quite got the concept. I remember being up at Focus on the Family's headquarters, and we're coming down to the final whatever, and we're sitting at the board table, and the head guy says, "Now, Bill, we're a little confused. Is McGee, which is the cartoon character, is McGee the devil, or is he an angel?" And we kind of laugh at that now because the series, obviously that's neither. But it was an interesting question. I remember looking down at the desk, going, "Any help, God?" And then it dawned on me, wait a minute. I'm in a shrink's ministry, right? Focus on the Family, Dr. Dobson. So I said, no, neither. He's the boy's alter ego. I'm not quite sure what an alter ego is to this day, but it was a good psych word. And everybody around the table went, "Oh, okay, good, of course." So that's how McGee and Me went.
Hmm. So, also, that seems like kind of a technical feat to pull off at the time, right?
Yeah.
To put in an animated character to a live action show that at the time, were you planning on it being a network show, or was it always planned to be direct to consumer type video, or?
I don't know what the grown-ups had planned. I just wanted to turn it into a series that would teach, but not get caught, right? To candy coat the message with such entertainment that the kids didn't taste the medicine until it went down. So,
That's what you mean by not get caught.
yeah, not get caught preaching. And to this day, I get emails from people that say, yesterday I got an email from a missionary couple in the Philippines that said, McGee and Me was sort of laying the foundation for the rest of our childhood, which, eventually went into what they're doing now. So, yeah, I'm just along for the ride. And I'm grateful for wherever it goes. Always scared, always perplexed, and always sure that this time God is on vacation, but he always shows up, usually at the last minute, but he always shows up.
I remember the episode where he sneaks into a movie he's not supposed to watch.
Yeah.
And then feels guilty about it later and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote that one, again, going back to my initial entrance into the media, looking at the power of film. So I wrote that very intentionally, talking about be careful what you watch because it does affect you. In fact, there was a study at J.L. Singer at Yale University did a study that said the outlook on any morality can be changed through enough TV viewing, which is a pretty audacious thing to say. But you look at our culture, and again, that's my prejudice. I mean, that's my wheelhouse, so I'm always paying attention to it. But I just see the way we're slowly getting pulled into a culture that is not necessarily what Jesus had in mind. Just by the gradual, seems each season we're pushing the envelope further and further away. I have friends at one of the major networks who's I mean, he gets an agenda. We have to have this variety of people and this variety of people, and yeah, so it's not arbitrary. Whether execs know it or not, there's a trend going on.
Is that how you view stuff like McGee and Me and your books? Do you view it as something for people to consume that instead of subtly changing their worldview to the negative, to be the opposite, to draw them to God without them knowing? Is that kind of why
Yeah,
you do it?
yeah, it's a little yeah, it's a little subterfuge, I suppose, or if that's the right word. But yeah, and but also as I'm getting older and maybe seeing the clock ticking down, I'm becoming a little more bold with things. I'm working on a series now that is all about a fellow who, an agnostic who Jesus keeps showing up in his life. And they have these off the record conversations. It kind of messes up his life a little bit to have this, and nobody else sees him. But I'm not pulling any punches about Jesus, but trying to keep the same accessibility and friendliness and sense of humor that Jesus had in those days as he's talking with this guy. And that series is, I mean, that's pretty overt. You know, you got Jesus showing up. It's called Rendezvous with God. I'm working on episode 6 right now. And then I wrote another one called Eli, which is a retelling of the gospel as if it happened today in America instead of 2,000 years ago. And that strips away all the religious varnish we've coated him up in and the insulation that we use to protect ourselves from his radicalness, and hundreds and hundreds of emails from people that say, now I get him. Some of my favorites are from people that say, I've been a Christian all my life, and well, now I know who Jesus is. So, yeah, I'm becoming a little more outspoken, and maybe it's because things are getting darker and I'm not trying to camouflage. I don't know if that is the answer as now as it would have been maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago.
That's interesting you say that. It reminds me of this writing experiment that my literature professor at Moody had, Dr. DesRosiers. She had this thing that she would have us do. Basically, she would have us write, who is Jesus to you? But not what the right answer is. Like, how do you actually picture him?
Ah.
And it was very interesting because, you know, some people were like, well, you know, he's distant. He doesn't really talk to me. He's kind of this silent character in the background, like unapproachable.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like a lot of people had him as that character.
Yeah. Or a philosophy. And it's like, that's why I love teaching at this prep school is, again, the kids come in as teenagers tend to do with all the answers. And yeah, we got Jesus all figured out. And I just systematically strip away all of the misconceptions. And hopefully by the time they walk out of the class at the end of the semester, they realize that he is a friend that died so the two of you could hang out together. And that's a far cry different from some flannel graph Sunday school, person. So even as we're talking, I'm thinking my agenda has shifted. It's shifted to reveal, not just to glorify Christ, but to reveal who he really is, my understanding of who he really is. That's what this Rendezvous with God series is all about. That's what Eli's about. And some other projects that I plan to write afterwards is just to show him who he really is, as opposed to who the various boxes we try to, corner him in. Try to let Aslan out of the cage.
Yeah.
so he can do what he does best, and that's love on people and make them whole.
Yeah. And really make him real as opposed to, like you said, a philosophy,
Yeah,
an ideal, really a personification of a philosophy as opposed to a person, right?
yeah, yep,
And
yep, yep.
and so that Rendezvous with God series, that seems like what you're doing. You are trying to actually show that Jesus can be encountered.
And in fact, yes. So he's. I don't want my audience to learn about Jesus. I want them to experience him,
Yeah.
which is great for storytelling because you do experience the story. So I really feel like I'm functioning on all cylinders now with that type of outlook to experience Jesus. Don't just learn about him. And you get away with that with storytelling. I'm writing this series in a way I've never written before. My imagination pretend Jesus is either sitting on this desk or back in one of these chairs, and I'll purposefully write myself into a corner and not have an answer, as our character would do, right? He'd be asking Jesus these tough questions, and I don't have the answer. But I'll purposely write him into a corner and then take a minute and turn to the chair or wherever I believe Jesus is sitting and go, now what? And the stuff that bubbles up in my head as I wait on him is way beyond my pay grade. And it makes me seem real profound and whatever, whatever. But so even now, even for me, the writing isn't experiencing Jesus. So it's not just the end agenda. It's the actual it's the actual experience as it's happening.
Yeah, it reminds me almost of like Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, like that kind of approach to being with Jesus of you're always with him, but you're saying, because we can tend to think of writing and creativity as, you always think of it as kind of a solo endeavor when you really want to get some work done. But you're saying this project in particular, not all your other projects, but this one in particular has been more of like this ongoing conversation.
It's. I know this sounds pretentious, but in this series, it's as much prayer as it is writing. We're literally having conversations back and forth, oftentimes giggling at my own boneheadedness, as happens with our antagonist or our protagonist in the series. And it's just like, of course, why didn't I think of that? Well, that's why I'm God and you're not. Okay, got it. Yeah, so it's. I don't know how to say it without sounding precocious and pretentious, but writing this series for me is as much prayer as it is typing. That's why I intended it to be one book, and now I'm working on the sixth one.
Mm.
Not because I'm making oodles of money out of it. Very few people know about the series, but because I'm enjoying the conversation.
Mm, that makes total sense. So, okay, so I had a question because McGee and Me came out in 89, I believe. But I looked at like your first credit and it's 79. So that's a big kind of jump from first job to kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, McGee and Me kind of a game changer for you, like in terms of your career. Was that like a pivot point?
Yes, but those 10 years you're talking about, I was busy doing documentaries, and like I said, for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, for different missions groups. A lot of times I would talk the groups into letting me do dramatics because dramatics tend to have more of an impact than facts and figures. I think that's why Jesus spent more time in parables than he did facts and figures, and that's taking the information and putting it on flesh and bones. And there were films like Bamboo in Winter for Open Doors that dealt with the persecution of the church in China. So I was busy doing these 60-minute dramatics and just learning to be content, having low profile and not being known. And then McGee and Me popped, and then it was like, okay, I'll change hats and pretend I know what I'm doing on a bigger scale.
Yeah. And how did that pop and how did that change the Christian like video market, or was there even a Christian video
I don't
market?
think there were a few. There were a few. I remember Donut
Donut Man, yeah.
Donut Man, yeah, but not much. But it really did change the 16 millimeter dramatic film market, which was when they'd show the films in the church. Because why go to church when you can pop something into your VHS machine and watch? So, but yeah, so it put a lot of my friends out of work eventually because there wasn't a market for church films anymore.
What were church films? Were these like directly distributed to the church for public
Yeah,
viewing type stuff, or?
exactly. A Thief in the Night would be an example. These were 60-minute dramatics that they'd send the catalog out to the pastors and to the youth workers, and then they would order the film, and the film would come in. They had their 16 millimeter projector, and this was a big deal. It was film night. And that all sort of went away when home videos started to take over.
So that was this public viewing experience. I'm guessing they paid more than somebody would pay for a DVD or something,
Yeah.
or VHS at the time,
Yeah.
to have it for the whole church. And so that shifted to, well, I mean, people had TVs already, but when was VHS? 80s, early 80s, late 80s?
Yeah. Mid to late 80s.
So this was late 80s. So this wasn't long after.
No, this was right in the middle of that, and I think I mentioned we were a little concerned that Christians would have a VHS machine in their house, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because it was such a change. Um, yeah,
Going back to what you were saying, documentaries, making films for organizations, that kind of stuff. These 16 millimeter films, you were doing those types of things.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Child Evangelism Fellowship. We do a series of 15-minute films that they would show on fairgrounds, in a tent.
Mm.
But again, all of that shifted once video strutted into the mainstream.
So was that that was your full-time job from 79 on?
Yep.
You never had to go back and get a day job, quote unquote?
A couple times. I got a little crazy when our first daughter was born. I thought, oh no, now I have to be a grown up. I have to do something substantial. So I started going into schools teaching for the Rape and Sexual Abuse Center of Ventura County, which was great training for what I've been doing, for suddenly becoming a public speaker, because you've got 25 critics there that all know more than you. So yeah, so I did that. Before that, once in a while, some acting jobs. Once in a while, I was a longshoreman for a while, odds and ends. But the primary work was always in the media. Plus, a dad who owned a hardware store, grew up on the farm in Missouri, but somehow felt that what I was doing was God's work. And for about a year, maybe even two, every month the rent check would come in from him. Just helped a lot.
Mm.
Which, again, this is a man that grew up in the Depression, grew up on the farm, owned something as practical as a hardware store, and now Billy is in Hollywood making movies for God. Guess what makes a great person?
Yeah. So he believed in you, and he was a man of faith.
Yeah. He sensed something in me that was authentic and genuine, and that wasn't interested in being a famous anything. So, and the check would always have on the bottom, for God's work, which was a good reminder for me to. There was a Bible verse, I think it's in Timothy, that kept Brenda and I going for quite a while. No soldier involved in active duty entangles themselves in the affairs of everyday life. And more times than I can think, I point that out to the Lord. Look, I'm serving you. I'm saying yes to you all the time. I really shouldn't be so concerned about entangling myself in the affair. If I'm in the Army, I would not be worried about housing and clothing. The Army would supply that. So he did that. A lot of times through my dad, but suddenly a job would come up, and there we were.
Wow. Was it mainly how you were being provided for, like physically, like food, shelter, etc.? Or were you also applying that verse in the sense of not getting distracted by things?
Both,
Yeah.
both, yeah.
What were the distractions that you were struggling with?
Rent,
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one.
yeah. And then Brenda, was working full time. So I guess I had a team on my side. I was too, as a 20-year-old, too enamored with myself to pay much attention. But yeah, I guess there were people that were there all the time, supporting me, both emotionally and I mean, with this other successful kids book series, The Incredible Worlds of Wally McDougall, My Life As it's also known as. We got a check from the publisher and put it on the bulletin board, getting ready to cash it. But they said, we're just going to do one book. I remember Brenda came into the office, which, by the way, is a garage, came into the office here, and I said, I think we should send that check back because I think we can buy this book back and try to sell it someplace else. And talk about a supporting wife. Her response was, okay, because we needed that money. And so she was a real support too. So we bought that book back and we sent it to another publisher and they didn't buy it, and another publisher and they didn't buy it. We went through every major Christian publisher that existed at that time because it was a comedy book. Comedy's the best candy coating for teaching a message. You can look at things like, well, you can look at some of what's out there and know that comedy is a good way to change your perspectives. Modern Family would be a great example. It changed our perspective towards the homosexual community through comedy, through laughing. But publishers weren't savvy to that. Plus, the main character was a boy, and they said, well, nobody reads boys' books. And I said, well, what's out there for boys? And they said, well, there's this horse story, right? And there's this dance story. All right, I'm waiting. But so it was a circular reasoning. Nobody was publishing for boys because boys weren't buying because there was nobody publishing for boys.
Right.
And it was my experience with McGee and Me that you can have a boy being the protagonist and girls will still watch it. Finally, one publisher said, I still have the contract just to remind me, from one publisher that said, we like it, Bill, but we'd like to change just one thing. Oh, what's that? Let's make it The Incredible Worlds of Wally and Molly McDougall, because you see, they're twins. Like I hadn't heard that for 20 minutes, a twins thing.
Yeah.
So I keep that anyway. So eventually it's sold. It took off, and they keep reprinting it. And
what year was that?
90 maybe, 1990.
Oh, so that was simultaneous.
Right after McGee.
Okay.
Right after McGee.
Okay.
Yeah. Left McGee, directed Bamboo in Winter for Open Doors, which dealt with the persecuted church, and then was asked to write the skit for Vacation Bible School. And 28 volumes, that's a ton. That's killing a lot of trees.
Yeah.
And like I said, I used to get emails from boys. No, letters from boys. They weren't even written. They were like carved into the paper. Mr. Myers, I don't read much. When's your next book coming? Your bestest pal, Gus. So that was an encouragement. But going all the way back before we went down that rabbit trail, would not have been able to do that if I didn't have a wife that said, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when did life change from macaroni and ramen to, I don't know, chicken sandwiches or whatever?
Probably The Incredible Worlds of Wally McDougall.
In the 90s.
Yeah. McGee and Me was successful from people return my phone calls with McGee and Me. But the deal we cut with the publisher was I sold them all the rights. And even though it was a tremendous success, the way it was constructed didn't leave a whole lot of money for the creator. How's that for being political. Did I just say that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very grateful for the series. I'm grateful for working with people. Did it make me any money? Not much. Some, not much. But Wally McDougall, on the other hand, just paid for a house.
Yeah. So, what affected success in that sense? What effect did that have on you?
I was very intentional to make sure it was, the Lord talks about giving talents and how we invest talents. I was very careful to invest that in eternal things. This would mean going to school after school after school, sometimes like a tour, to teach writing. I still do that from time to time. But the deal was, I'll be the celebrity, but you have to let me do a chapel. So I'd go in, I'd do a chapel, which is why I did it. And then, we'd sign the books and do whatever else. So it was really a test that I think I passed as far as, okay, I've given you this talent. What are you going to do with it? So I quickly reinvested it. So in that way, it changed my life. People return my phone calls. And then I think the third way is trusting that my instincts, even though they're outside the box, are right. McGee and Me was outside the box. Wally McDougall. I mean, now there's some other projects that are like inspired by it, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and those weren't around. Wally McDougall, the star, is a seventh grade school walking disaster area. Anything that can happen wrong happens to this poor guy, and he's the all school punching bag. And again, the publisher said, "Well, kids don't want to read. Kids can't relate to that." So it helped me to trust my instincts, to realize that I'm marching a little out of step with the rest of publishing, but I'm maybe a half a step ahead, a little more confident in my instincts.
Hmm. So you had a little more freedom to try things out without needing people's permission, in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. And the first obstacle is my own insecurity, right? Like, oh, now am I really, what am I? This is crazy, nuts. And then that would eventually translate when I'd take it to a publisher. To this day, taking it to the publishers. This Rendezvous with God series, again, people were nervous about that. Jesus showing up and joking and helping this agnostic get his life together. Well, that's not quite what Christian publishing's supposed to be about.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it gave me freedom from my own insecurities, but also a certain amount of, if a publisher says no, well, that's okay. There's other publishers. And if they keep saying no, there's always self-publishing, because I think there's something here. And it's the same thing in Hollywood, because, we've got a film company and we're producing some things. And there are a couple of companies, Christian companies, that say, well, Myers, you're just a little too out of the box for us. And that doesn't hurt my feelings anymore. I'm just thinking, well, you'll come along.
Yeah.
Not from an ego point of view, but just looking back at history and seeing that it tends to happen that way. So for me, novels are a novelty. A lot of times writers write novels that aren't so novel, right? They're great stories, but they're not really novel. So I'm doing that, taking a lot of chances, and not as successful initially because everybody's suspicious. Most people are suspicious, but eventually the stuff catches on.
I want to ask you a little bit about your process, because I know you had said something about something like the snooze test or whatever, but with your dad, right?
Yeah.
What is that, and do you still do that, or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if you have what's in the background behind me. There's two chairs. One is a chair where I pretend Jesus is sitting. There's a stuffed dog there right now, just for reasons that are too complicated to get into. We have a kids series called Secret Agent Dingledorf and His Trusty Dog Splat. It's a movie. It's out on Amazon or somewhere. And that was our stunt dog. But across the room is a easy chair that my dad used to come into this office and sit. And I'd say, Dad, as I'm learning to write, I'd say, Dad, listen to this. This is a great paragraph. And I would read it to him, and with wonderful flowery words and what writers do. And I'd get through maybe two or three sentences, and I'd hear, and I'd turn and look over my shoulder, and he'd fallen asleep. I said, Dad, yeah, that's very good, son. You didn't hear a thing, did you? Well, no, read it to me again. And it was just like rinse and repeat. So it became my agenda to keep my dad awake. And so to this day, I'm writing to keep my dad engaged. I'm not spending time on flowery descriptions, but I'm always trying to keep the energy. And energy is not just plot or action. It can be what's going on inside a character too, but just so that there's always something happening. In a sense, I write making believe the reader has a channel selector in their hand. And if I bore them, we're on to the next channel. So it's a little, I think maybe I have a little bit of ADD too, which comes in handy. Well, I'm bored. I better go back and fix that paragraph. So every paragraph, something is happening. It's not just there to fill up space.
I've noticed that's a good impetus for editing. It's like when you're like, oof, I don't want to have to read that chapter again. When you probably have to get rid of it or something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or make it a sentence or a paragraph or whatever.
No matter how pretty it is, if it doesn't advance and hold and engage, you might want to take a hatchet to it.
Yeah, they have not such a pretty phrase saying kill your babies when talking about killing them. But I think what I get from that is no matter how much time you spent on something, I think that's normally why people have a hard time getting rid of something is because, well, I'm trying to think of an example, but I remember hearing something about like a happy accident. Well, let's just, I'm going to just transition to sports, even though I know that's totally different. But for instance, NFL teams can do this, where they spent a very high draft pick on a quarterback who, that cost them a lot of money or cost them a lot of capital for their team. And then even though there's this backup guy who's way better, they're starting this guy because it's kind of like, well, we sunk this much into this guy. We gotta at least try him out.
Yeah.
And, so that kind of stuff happens. And I think for me, it does become hard to cut those things that you're like, yeah, but I spent so much time on that, or I spent money on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just
a lot of time in screenplays, or actually in books too. The first couple chapters are just warming up, just to get yourself familiar with the atmosphere and culture that you've created. Well, the audience doesn't need that. They buy it like that. So, yeah, as you said, kill your darlings if you have to. And a lot of times those first two chapters or those first two scenes in a movie, they're gone.
Yeah.
Just cut them because if you don't, somebody else will. Or, they'll either skim over it or they'll go, well, that book was boring. So they'll cut you out.
Yeah. They won't get to the good part. They won't get to the interesting part.
Yep.
So that's kind of the effect that we could call it success, or maybe the lack of financial pressure. Now you have a little bit more freedom. How did that affect other peers that you had in the creative industry when they finally gained that? Was it the same? Did they struggle with it?
I don't know. One of my peers is Frank Peretti. We were friends long before he was Frank Peretti or I was Bill Myers. We were a couple of kids with dreams. And when Frank's book, This Present Darkness, hit, Amy Grant, who was instrumental in jump-starting his career, flew him out. And, and back then there would be the life-size cardboard cutouts of Amy or Frank or somebody, there in the bookstore. And she said something to Frank, and Frank said it to me, and I'll never forget it. He said, just remember, the Bill Myers everybody makes a big deal about is just a commodity. It's not you. And that frees me up in a lot of ways. It frees me up to talk about my work without going, aw shucks, because it's just a commodity. It's not me. And it frees me up so when success happens, It's success of the commodity, not success for me. And then when you crash and everybody crashes, it's like, it's not me. It's the commodity there's the Bill Myers product, and then there's the Bill Myers person. And that it's just been invaluable. It kept Frank's head in the game, or feet on the ground. There's a mixed metaphor. And it's been real helpful to me too. And people always say, "Oh, yeah, Bill, you're so humble." It's like, no, I know who I am. Trust me. And if you knew who I was, you would be embarrassed about yourself too. Now, the commodity is a different matter, and we can talk about the product. But so there's two of me. There's the perceived me, and then there's the real me. And if you have a problem with believing that, I got a couple daughters and a wife you're more than welcome to talk to.
Did it have an effect on your relationships in the sense that did you ever feel like people started to use you for the commodity bill?
Oh, always, always. And that's okay. That's okay. Um, Personal relationships, we deconstruct that real fast. And pretty soon they know that who they're really dealing with, and they're okay with that. Or they're not, and they move on. To this day, there's a couple producers that are using me, but they're not using me. They're using the commodity. They're using the product, and that's okay. That's okay. But they're not going to get into my life because that's different.
Yeah. Did you have any of your other friends or contemporaries struggle with that, being sought after like that?
Yeah, yeah. I can't speak for them or how they've handled it. I can speak, I think, for Frank because we're so tight. But yeah, it comes with the territory. It's one of the reasons I don't read my reviews. I have people that will tell the emperor whether he's wearing clothes or not. They'll look at the stuff and say, come on. But I don't read my reviews because if they're glowing, I can't get my head into this office. And if they're awful, then I start looking at sharp razor blades and wondering maybe we can put them to better use. So it's just a lose-lose situation. And again, I think that comes back to Amy's suggestion to Frank and Frank's suggestion to me. It's like, work is work. Bill Myers is Bill Myers, and there's two separate things. So you have to work a little bit to keep them separate.
Was that something you anticipated?
No, no. But it didn't catch me off guard either because I had plenty of warning from the people that know me.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like there are certain costs you have to pay if you want to have quote unquote success on a bigger level. Certain people have talked about this. People who are famous on YouTube, etc., they can't just go to Starbucks, you know what I mean, depending on their level of fame, and without being interrupted or, people taking pictures and stuff like that.
But that's the nice thing about being an author.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, once in a while we do something like this, but for the most part, nobody knows who I am. And that's good. We used to have retreats here at the house, and we'd bring in, or they'd come in, 20, 25 of the top Christian authors, and we'd hang out for 2 or 3 days here, and we'd be careful not to let the local bookstores know we were here. And that was about the only, but we'd go out and eat together, and nobody knew who we were. And some of them, certainly have a big, big footprint, but nobody knew.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference between being behind or in front of the camera, or even behind or in front of the microphone. Because even I think radio music, like those people, music especially, because they put out their concerts and stuff like that. But yeah, there are different types of notoriety in media to where you can be doing quite well and nobody knows you. And I think that's a great place to be. Yeah.
It is. The only thing I have to worry about as far as appearances is I'm a teacher here locally. And, when somebody cuts me off on the freeway and I want to express my emotions towards them, I have to be careful because it might be one of my students.
Yeah. Yeah. My pastor said something similar about, driving around the town. It's just like there's always somebody,
Yeah.
that knows who you are around there.
Yeah, the Lord is good at just clearing his throat and saying, um, yes, sir.
Yeah, definitely. Doesn't let you get away with too much.
Thank God.
Yeah. What are your favorite things to talk about with, like, let's say those authors from the Writers Retreat or fellow professionals in film or TV or anything that are believers? What do you like to ask them about or talk to them about?
The depth of the relationship with God, how they're succeeding or failing in it. Now, that's not the answer you wanted. I think the answer you were thinking of was, well, what do professionals get to, talk about when they get together? It's not how this works. So, yeah, usually, even when you and I were talking before we began here, we're talking about deeper stuff. You came out to the house the day before, and we were not talking about podcasts and stuff like that. So it's probably an irritant to people, but I'm so deep in God's love that it's a little bit like the first time you're in love with somebody. You're boring all your friends because all you do is talk about her. Well, that's kind of how it is with Jesus. But for me, it's a little different because I'm not interested in the surface, the superficial stuff.
That kind of brings me to your backyard that we met in, but you were telling me about your, I don't know what you call it, your prayer area
Yeah.
behind the fence over there. What do you refer to it as again? It's where you wrestle with God?
Yes, it's a wrestling match. And you're welcome to take a picture or two of it before you leave if you want to do an insert. Yeah, it's a great place to wrestle with God. I I brought in about 3 inches of sand so I can throw myself on the ground and get really, whiny and dramatic with him. But yeah, we have some great conversations there and some great arguments and a lot of laughs. A
Yeah.
lot of laughs. It's like, of course. Why didn't you bother telling me? Why didn't you bother listening?
Yeah.
Well, there is that. Yes, there is.
Mm.
So yeah. So prayer for me is not irreverent because he's who he is, but it really is talking to my dad, who sometimes I think gets me in a headlock and a knuckle thing on my head, saying, "Come on, Bill." All right, but it really is, and maybe that's what I sense. Maybe what some of the differences between me and other people. It's nothing I've generated on my own, but just this intimacy, continual intimacy, having to be careful not to be talking out loud in public but then they just think I'm on the cell phone, so I'm okay with that now too.
Right, right. Yeah, how long has prayer been like that for you? As long as you can remember, as long as...
Just about. I think when I got really serious back in this, I'll just say yes to whatever you want. That's when I started to talk back a little bit.
Yeah.
And which I think he appreciates. It's either that or silence, or worse of all, confining him to being a religious entity. So I think the relationship began when I started talking back a little bit. Look, I know I said yes, but come on. So I think it just started to grow from there.
Yeah.
Also, I have such low aptitude, if that's the right word. I'm not very smart, so I have to rely on him a lot. And I always come out sounding like a genius, but nobody knows the internal monologue, which is, okay, got it, okay, that's good, thank you. So again, I think the keys to my success are I'm a crybaby, I'm a coward, I'm a loser, but I'm just somebody that says yes all the time, even when I'm sure he's lost control of reality.
What led to you making that commitment?
Two things. I was bored with Christianity. The second thing was a girl I dated for 3 years in high school dumped me. So I had to make a decision to either kill myself or to say yes to God 100% of the time. And so apparently I made the right decision. But yeah, so it was, my folks were getting a divorce. My girlfriend that I dated for 3 years, was dropping me. It's my first year in college, so there was all this emotional stuff going on. And the only anchor was God. So, big storm, but a bigger rock that I just clung to and got through it with that agreement.
How has your wrestling with God and your prayer evolved over the decades?
Now I'm not asking why. Now I'm asking how. Instead of, why are you doing this? Now my response is, okay, so how can I get with the program and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish? You see the difference? One is questioning him, questioning his authority, questioning his godness. And the other is, okay, I don't get you, but I trust you. So show me how. So I don't ask why anymore. I ask how.
Interesting. So you just kind of don't need to know why. Just
would prefer it.
Yeah.
And make that known too. But it's like, okay, over 50 years of saying yes like this, okay. All righty then.
I know from what you've told me, you like to take an interest in younger people who are getting into television, film, etc. What types of things do you like to impart to them?
That relationship is more important than accomplishment. That, Bible says it best, right? Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything else happens. It really does. It's a backwards way of thinking. Don't blame me for it. It's this upside down kingdom of God business. But as you seek him, things fall into place. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. By all, he doesn't necessarily mean, the poisons. Maybe he's not going to give you heroin, even though you're begging for it. But all the good stuff you get. He can't help himself.
What do you feel like they're typically seeking when they come to you, the younger generations?
Sometimes success. But I think, as you're in my case, what can I learn from somebody that's been walking this long and this intimately with God? And not in your case, but a lot of times people say, well, how do we get successful? But yours, in my case, it was, we both have what's that? Deep calling unto deep. So there's a depth that people sense in me. And those that are seeking depth, right, we're talking depth. Compared to the paper thinness of our Christian culture, I'm a genius.
And is that because, like you said earlier, just because you're willing, do you think? Because you were saying, well, first of all, just back to your resolution of always saying yes to God. I think there's a lot of Christians who would call themselves believers, and maybe are, but haven't made that resolve.
Yeah.
And so why do you think that is?
Fear and misrepresentation. I think people that present Christ to people misrepresent him, not intentionally, but whether they present him superficially, whether they present him as, here's somebody you can manipulate to get what you want, but also just the fear of not trusting him, because he's a scary dude, right? He's just like, every time we say, God, which is it, A or B? He says, oranges. I'm sorry, what? Because we don't even know how to ask the right questions. So, of course, that's fear. But what's the Bible verse? Perfect love casts out all fear. I'm not afraid of where he's taking me now. I've got some preferences, but I'm not afraid because of that perfect love that's just pushed out the fear. There's no room for the fear. But that love doesn't come unless it comes from a relationship, right? It's not like, yeah, give me your love now. But it comes from that time of trusting and questioning and being angry and always having him prove himself. Not because I'm demanding he prove himself, but just because he's faithful regardless of the storms.
Were you around anyone growing up or
Nope.
throughout your life that you felt like modeled that for you?
Not a one.
So it just came from directly?
I think it's a gift. I think it's a gift. I know I started reading the Bible in junior high. While my friends were busy hiding Playboy under the mattress, I was busy hiding the Bible because I didn't want to get caught being one of those people. But I was just so enamored by the stuff Jesus was doing. So it started then. But also, I remember my dad reading Bible stories to me, and stuff. But yeah, I think it's just, I would just blame God for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you would like to share with people who are considering trusting God in the area of their creativity and sharing it with other people?
Yeah. Among all the stuff that we've talked about, grow where you're planted. If you want to be a writer and somebody needs somebody to write for the church bulletin, then do that. It's the disciples with the bread and the fish. They got nothing, right? And what does Jesus say? Give them what you got. We got nothing. Then give it away. So I think you can't outgive God. I play a game with him. Who can outgive who? And he hates losing. He refuses to lose. So wherever you're at, whatever your art is, or whatever your call is, give what you got. If it's, these measly fish and bread, then give it. And it won't happen overnight. In my 50 years, he's never proven to be unfaithful. In the long run, in the short run, I'm sure he is, in my mind. But he always winds up being faithful. And he's been doing, he's been doing this God gig for at least 6,000 years and hasn't failed yet. So he has a pretty good track record. Give him what you got, regardless of where it is. My first acting job, my first acting job down here was I sat on stage and not a word, didn't say a word. And that group, that relationship, I was a counsel to a lawyer. There's a lawyer and I was his assistant. And I was just there for him to refer to and talk to. And I'm thinking, okay, that's all I got. So here you go. And then it grows and it grows and it grows. A lot of times like a tree, right? Not like a weed that, and then it's gone. But like a tree, just steady and slow.
Thank you so much, Bill.
This is fun.
It was fun.
You ought to do this for a living.